Continuing on with Esther. We're picking up in chapter 6 this morning. Let's just, fast track things. I'm going to skip a good chunk of stuff. Let's just go straight to the prayer and ask God to bless our time, and then we'll dig into His Word. Heavenly Father, Lord, we pray that you would open our ears, open our hearts, open our minds, that we may hear, that we may see, that we may understand, that we may be changed and transformed by the good news of Esther, by the good news of Esther 6, that we may not forget about your Son as the ultimate reward. And we'd be encouraged by that, and that we would be a transformed life, a life for you. In Jesus' name, amen. So Esther chapter 6 this morning. Esther has been kissing up to Xerxes. We saw this last week in chapter 5. Esther is basically kissing up and trying to butter Xerxes up. She finally got brave. She went to Xerxes. She started pleading on behalf of the Jews, but she hasn't done it in a really blatant way, that she has not yet come out and said, look, Xerxes, I'm a Jew, and so this edict that you issued, or this edict that was issued in your name, it's going to affect even me. You know, if you're going to actually have all the Jews in this kingdom killed, that means even me, your favorite concubine, your queen. I fall under that. I'm guilty of that, and you're going to lose even me if you're going to follow this out all the way through. And so, rather than coming right out and saying that, she's actually kind of being a little bit manipulative, or maybe very manipulative in many ways. She devises this plan to throw this banquet, an extremely exclusive banquet, a banquet just for Xerxes, just for his best friend Haman, so that they may come, they may get some, really good food and really good wine, get fat, get buttered up, really get happy for a while. And they come to this banquet, and Xerxes again says, Esther, what do you want? What can I give you? What is your request? Because Xerxes kind of knows how this works. He knows that Esther's building up to something. And Esther again says nothing. But if I found favor, if you like me, if you really like me as much as you say you do, come back tomorrow. Both of you, come back tomorrow. I'm going to throw another banquet, a second banquet. Now, one banquet, that's good enough. One banquet that is, as exclusive as this one is, that is something in itself. But a second banquet, man, this has got to be something really good. So Esther throws a second banquet, and we don't get to that second banquet quite yet. We don't even get to it even today yet. But Haman goes home from that banquet feeling really good about himself. We've come to know Haman as really, pretty egotistical, pretty self-centered in so many ways. So he goes home, and he's feeling good about himself, and as he's leaving the palace, he sees Mordecai again. And all of a sudden, everything that has just gone on, this banquet, all this building up, all this pride that has been swelling up inside of him, it's gone. And he goes home, and he complains like a spoiled little rich brat in so many ways. Goes home and he complains to his friends and his wife and his family, and he shows off everything that he has. And finally, we're left with this plan, this great plan, the perfect plan, so they think, to get rid of Mordecai once and for all. Rather than wait until this day that the edict has issued, Mordecai decides, or Haman decides that he's going to build a gallows, a pole 75 feet high, make an example out of Mordecai, execute him, get rid of him, and he's gone, and everybody's going to know that this is what happens to the person who offends Haman, who breaks his pride. And that's what we're picking up this morning. I'm the kind of person that, and I know, for some of you this is probably going to really irritate you. I'm the sort of person, when I read a story, I have this really bad habit of never reading a story all the way through to the end. I say to people, and I tell people sometimes, I've read most of the Harry Potter stories. I have this habit where I will read a book and I will get all the way through and I'll stop just before the last couple chapters, right when everything gets resolved, because I don't know, it's at that point that I tend to get bored with reading. So I tend to just kind of read all the way up to the end, and then I stop and I never really finish anything. You can look at the books on my shelf and you go in my office. I've read most of them, but I rarely actually read an entire book. And we're going to kind of do that this morning. When we deal with chapter 6, we're going to read chapter 6. We're going to read all but the last verse of chapter 6. And it's like, why? Why leave that out? Because I think that has more to do with actually next week than anything else. We're going to take a look at Esther chapter 6 this morning, the first 13 verses of Esther chapter 6. So Haman has this idea, has this plan, and this is where we pick up. That night, the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. The king said, who is in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole he had set up for him. His attendants answered, Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me? So he answered the king, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done to the man the king delights to honor. Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief and told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. I'm going to stop there. I almost finished it. I got close there. So, a couple of stories to kind of get us thinking about something here a little bit. A number of years ago, probably going all back almost, I want to say this is probably about 12 years ago or so. I was in college. Michelle was in college. I was serving as a pastoral intern at a small Baptist church in Eugene. And most of the work I was doing, even though it was a general internship for all pastoral ministry, most of what I did was focus on working with the youth. And Michelle and I that year, we went away, accompanied the youth group on a mission trip down to Mexico. It was a great opportunity, great experience. We did something a little bit different than what is normally done. Great opportunity for growth. We're on our way back. We were taking 99 back. We took I-5 south. We took 99 back. We stopped in Visalia, at In-N-Out Burger in Visalia for lunch. Now, I don't know about you and your experience when it comes to mission trips and going to church camps and things like that, but almost every time that I've been on something like this, inevitably some high school couple who at the beginning of the trip they're convinced they're going to marry each other and they're deeply in love. By the time the trip ends, there's been some massive blowout, there's drama, everybody is brought into it, and now they hate each other's guts. That's just kind of what happens. 2 out of 3 times, it's usually me in the middle of that. Not this time, thankfully. But that's just kind of one of the things that I've experienced. And it was no different on this trip either, on this mission trip either. So I'm driving one of the vehicles. We've got a bus and a couple other vehicles that are carrying other kids and other things. And we pull into In-N-Out in Visalia. And one of the kids gets off the bus and he just takes off. Doesn't tell anybody where he's going. He just takes off. He storms off and takes off. I get word gets back to me that there was this big fight, this big blowout. There was kind of this 3-way love triangle thing going on or something, I don't know. But he got offended by somebody else, and some girl didn't like him but liked some other boy, and it was a mess. And so as soon as the bus stopped, he just said, I'm just running away, I'm just getting out of here. And we're a church from Oregon, in Visalia, someplace that we don't know or anything else along those lines. And he just takes off. We don't know where he went. A couple of years before that, I was making regular trips from Ripon down to Visalia to visit friends that I had met at Mount Hermon, down by the Santa Cruz, down just north of Santa Cruz. I was making regular trips down there, hanging out with them, and I had spent a lot of time at the Visalia Mall, which is right across the street from that In-N-Out where we stopped at. I was the only person who knew my way around there. So I got out, I hear about this kid running off, and I think, okay, you know what, I got a pretty good idea where he went. So I take off, I go straight over to the mall, find him sitting exactly where I expected to see him sitting, and all is well. If we didn't have somebody who knew the area, there's no telling how long we would have been stuck there hunting and making phone calls and trying to explain to his parents why we lost somebody in California. But we did. Coincidence? Maybe. It's hard to say. Another story. Kind of funny-ish, but this one involves you a little bit more. Kind of gets you guys involved in it a little more. Back in 2008, Michelle and I were out in Calvin Seminary out in Grand Rapids, Michigan, getting snowed in and just absolutely miserable because that's the way it is in West Michigan. No offense to those of you who have been there, but I'm glad that I like the sun out here, so I'm good with that. So we're out there about 2008. Michelle and I are going through this process of discerning where and what kind of ministry God has in store for us. And we're really starting to settle in and feel this strong pull that God is calling us to church planting. And so we start kind of going through this process of getting ready and preparing for church planting. I graduated in 2009, and as I'm approaching graduation, I get word back that says, the denomination wants me to do one more thing before they're actually going to give me permission to graduate. And I got that word actually 2 days, I think, after graduation. I graduated, and then they tell me they're not going to let me actually look for a job until I finish this one last project, this one last internship. We decided, okay, that's fine. I'll come back out to Oregon. We were planning on planting a church originally. I'll get this internship out there, and everything's going to be great. We get to Oregon, and there's a 2-year wait list to get into this particular internship that we want. We've got a kid on the way. We're living with Michelle's parents. We have no money. The student debt is starting, people are starting to come after us with student debt, and I've got to wait 2 years until I can actually get a job, basically. At about that same time, here at Faith Fellowship, y'all were starting to go through a bit of a leadership crisis. Things were starting to fall apart. People were starting to get angry. There was a lot of tension. There was a lot of hurt and a lot of pain that was starting to go around. The church started to shrink, and people were leaving, and just things got messy. And you entered about a 3-year period where you just decided to sit back and go through the process of reconciliation and forgiveness and try and sort through everything that had happened in order to get ready to move forward. I got this internship that I needed in a shorter time than expected. I wrapped it up. I got my first call to church planting. It was supposed to be a 3-year call, and after 1.5 years, we shut it down. Michelle and I were in pain. We were absolutely in pain between our experience in seminary and between our experience in church planting. You guys were in pain because you were trying to figure out and wrestle and struggle with what exactly is going on here. Is it our fault? Is it somebody else's fault? What needs to happen? And in the midst of it all, both of us, 1,000 miles apart, are working through this process of trying to heal and bring forgiveness and forgive and reconcile wherever that was needed. About the time that you were ready to start looking for a pastor, we were about ready to start looking for a new call. And that is then the timing, the perfect timing in so many ways that brings the two of us together. And I don't want to read too much into this. I just kind of get a little self-centered or self-conscious about that sometimes. But I can't help but think the timing between the two of us coming together and moving forward, I don't think you can miss that. Is it coincidence? Or is there something more to it? And I point those two stories out to kind of get us thinking along those lines, because when we look at chapter 6, Esther 6 is really probably the funniest, in so many ways, the funniest chapter, the funniest part of the story of Esther. There's irony and there's coincidence, or so we think. We look at this and we see things starting to happen that just, it's too coincidental to be coincidence. There's no way that this stuff could just kind of work out this way. Haman is ready to kill Mordecai. He's got the plan set. He's ready to go. He's ready to execute. And he goes and he decides, I got to get up early. I've got to get up early in the morning. I'm going to go to Xerxes. I'm going to share this plan. And it's going to be great. And Haman's going to be gone. And Haman happens to go to Xerxes on a night where Xerxes happens to have a sleepless night. And this doesn't seem to just simply be, just one of those nights where it's too hot to sleep and you're restless. You can't really fall into that deep sleep and get really well rested. There seems to be something more going on here. There seems to be something, in many ways, something supernatural to the fact that Xerxes can't sleep this night. And it just happens to be on this night, between the first and second banquet, and that night that Haman is ready to kill Mordecai, just happens to be that night that Xerxes just happens to not sleep. And as a result of the fact that he just happens to not be able to sleep, he just happens to call for his servants, his attendants, to bring in the annals of his reign, the annals of his reign. This is like, Encyclopedia Britannica. Actually, it's even more boring than Encyclopedia Britannica. It's like pulling out the Constitution or something and reading that. He's trying to do something to make himself fall asleep. So he calls in his servants. He calls in this book. And this is a huge book. This is his own personal Google. I mean, everything big or small that could possibly be written down or worth keeping track of was written into this book. So he calls this book and he calls his servant in to read from this book. The chances that you're going to open up to any one entry in this book it's almost impossible. It's mind-boggling how much the odds were stacked against him in this sense. So on this night that he happens to not sleep, he happens to call in the book of the Annals of the Kings, and the book just happens to be opened up to that one story of Mordecai saving his life. Now that happened 5 years earlier. Mordecai and this whole scene of Mordecai preventing this assassination plot, this was 5 years before this. This was back in chapter 2 we talked about, and it was this weird kind of scene that seemed to be just kind of thrown in there randomly, and it didn't make sense. Mordecai breaks up this assassination plot, and under normal convention, he should have been honored. He should have received some sort of reward for this, but he's not. In fact, immediately right after that, the story cuts away, and we see Haman being honored instead for some unexplained reason. So Mordecai just goes back to the gate, and he just sits. He doesn't throw a fit. He doesn't raise issue with it. He just does his thing for 5 years. And now, 5 years later, on the night that Haman just happened to be planning his execution, and Xerxes just happened to not sleep and just happened to call for the book of Annals, and the book of Annals just happened to be opened up to that spot, that one account. Finally, Xerxes now just happens to be reminded about the fact that he never did anything for Mordecai for saving his life. So what is he going to do? What is he going to do? Well, he would ordinarily go and talk to his right-hand man, Haman, to get his advice, to find out, Haman, what do you recommend? What do you suggest? Well, Haman just happens to be standing in the court right outside his room, coming to talk to Mordecai, so there's no delay. Too coincidental to be coincidence. See, God is not mentioned anywhere in this book, but his fingerprints are all over it. God is not mentioned anywhere in this story, but you can't help when you look at these things and these coincidences and not see God at work in all of this and doing something in this story. So, Haman's outside. Xerxes wants to know what to do. And then Haman brings him in. Xerxes brings Haman in, and even before Haman has the ability to spring his plan about Mordecai on him, Xerxes jumps in and he says, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? What should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman, as we've all come to know him, he's egocentric, he's self-centered, he's got this ego, the size of Alaska. It's enormous, and everything he does is all about trying to push his own self, to elevate his own self, his own power, his own influence and reign and authority. And so Haman, just being who we've come to know him to be, thinks, well, who could possibly be more important than me? Who could the king possibly want to honor outside of me? And I'm already second in command. There's really no other place I can go, but I'm the only one that the king could honor. There's nobody else out there. Because that's the way Haman thinks about himself. So Haman says, and we see Haman thinking that at that second half of verse 6. Who is there that the king would rather honor than me? And so he answers the king. Haman's thinking, all right, this is my chance. This is my chance to get something really, really good out of Xerxes now. So he says, For the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with the royal crest placed on his head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him that this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. So Haman is thinking, I'm already second in command. What is the better honor? Well, I could be king for a day. I could be king for a day. Xerxes, I want you to step off your throne, go and hang out, take a vacation, take a day off, play hooky, let me put your clothes on, let me ride your horse. It's kind of weird and freaky, I know, but that's about as close as you can get to being king. Let me put your clothes on, let me ride your horse, let me go through the streets. Give me one of your most trusted, noble princes. Your favorite guy is going to stand in front of me, and he's going to walk through it. He's going to declare and go through the streets saying, this is what is done. Look, everyone look at this. This is what is done to the man who gets to be honored, who the king wants to honor. And then Haman's best day of his life, the day that he could potentially be king for a day, turns into one of his worst days. Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai, the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. Mordecai. Hold on here a second. Wait a minute, Xerxes. I mean, we need to have a conversation first. Before you start doing that, I got to talk to you about this Mordecai guy, okay? Because that's who I was just coming to talk to you about, or what I was coming to talk to you about. You can't give him this honor because there's problems with that. There's something wrong here. You know, I wanted to be the man. I'm supposed to be the man wearing your robe and sitting on your horse. I'm not supposed to be the noble prince to a man who I'm trying to kill. There's a problem here, Xerxes. That's where the humor comes in this story. The irony. This is where God is really starting to kind of flip things over and turn things on their head. And you know, God has a tendency of doing that. Taking, the first would be last, the last would be first, that whole idea of God taking these things and just doing what we least expect in those least likely situations and circumstances. This is the way that God works in the world. And I think sometimes he does this probably kind of giggling and chuckling in some ways because he knows it's going to completely throw us off. But when he does this sort of stuff, it emphasizes the fact that he's really the one in control. He's really the one that's making things happen here. He's really the one who's got the plan, who's carrying out that plan and making it happen in just the way that he wants. So Xerxes commands Haman to do this stuff for Mordecai. Haman, he can't argue with the king, so he has to do it. And he does it. You can kind of imagine him grudging through the streets. Hear ye, this is the one, the man wants on. He's saying it as softly as he possibly can because he doesn't want anybody to see that this is Mordecai on the horse, or this is Haman, down below leading the horse or doing any of that. And they go through the streets. They go through the streets in suits of doing this. And then Haman goes home with his head covered. He's so embarrassed. He's so shamed about what he has just been forced to do. He covers his head. He doesn't want anybody to recognize him. He doesn't want to be seen or noticed. And so he goes home. He goes home and he begins to complain again. Again, he goes to his wife and again he starts complaining. Verse 12, afterward Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief, and told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. Now these are the same people who told him back in chapter 5, build a pole, build a gallows, impale Mordecai and get rid of him. And now they're sitting and they're stepping back and they're starting to get it. They're starting to realize what's going on. Let's go back to that idea that I introduced a couple weeks ago about this whole kind of family feud sort of thing going on here again a second. Okay, Haman is an Agagite. There's this tension. There's this long-standing tension and rivalry between Haman and his Agagite descendants and Mordecai and his Benjamite descendants. And that just kind of carries out, and that's sort of one of these themes that's underlying the text here. And now Haman's wife is looking at this, and she's starting to see what's going on. She's starting to put the pieces together. She's starting to realize, Mordecai, you're fighting a losing battle here. All right, I know you're still alive. I know Mordecai's still alive. I know you got this edict, but this ain't going to go well. I can see it. The writing's on the wall. This is not going to end well for you. Just give up. Throw your hands up in the air and accept defeat because you're fighting God. You're not fighting Mordecai. You're fighting the God of the Jews. You're fighting a God who has promised to protect his people from your people specifically. Okay? You're fighting a losing battle. They see what's going on. It's a little bit like Oregon playing Cal on Friday night. I had to get that one in. Right, Rob? You're not even going to talk about that one. I had to get that one in. They see the writing on the wall. They know where this is going to go. And they start warning Haman. My guess is Haman knew what was going on. Haman knew the stories. He knew what God was doing. He could look back at history and see what the pattern was. My guess, he was just in denial. He was convinced that's not going to be him. He was convinced that he could do something about it. And meanwhile, his own wife is saying, nah, you're done. Give up. And it's not just give up and hopefully you'll be able to survive. It's give up because you're going to die. God's going to work out his plan here. And unfortunately, you're not on the good side of this plan as God is working it out. God is making good on his promises. He's making good on his promises to protect his people. He's making good on his covenant faithfulness in so many ways to his people, in which he said, you know what, I'm going to protect you, I'm going to care for you, I'm going to watch over you. And I'm going to work that out. And God is working that out right now. And Zeresh and Haman's friends are seeing that. You know, Jesus is a better reward though, right? I mean, you know Jesus is a better reward. You know, we can talk about that. We sit, we look at chapter 6 and we see the irony and the humor, and we see God doing something and making something happen that in many ways is so coincidental that it just simply can't be coincidence. And you can't help but sit here and think back that what we're ultimately looking at is a shadow, a taste, just that ever slight little hint that God actually has something bigger in store. See, Mordecai receives this royal reward. He's somebody who is really doesn't deserve it in any way. He's an ordinary Joe. He's an ordinary person. He's had his problems. We've seen him even in some ways kind of flat out lie in this story already by hiding his identity and getting Esther to hide her identity. And here he is, just because of his relationship with God and his identity. Here he is, all of a sudden getting this royal reward. He's not just getting a monetary prize. He's becoming king for a day, king for an hour, king for a couple of hours. He's getting something that we can only look forward to for ourselves. He's getting something that only Jesus can offer us. A while ago, a number of years ago, heard a sermon out of Romans that really had an impact on me. They're popular verses, and they tend to strike us in a slightly different way than what I'm going to emphasize here. But out of Romans chapter 5, verse 6, you see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And we tend to emphasize that last verse and that last part about Christ dying for us and the forgiveness we receive. That's good stuff. But I want to draw attention to this idea of timing. Because when you look at Esther 6 and you see God's impeccable timing and working things out down to the hour, but this was a plan that was spread out over centuries in so many ways. God's impeccable timing to save his people in Esther 6. That timing didn't end with Esther. It carried on all the way to the cross, and it carries on all the way to our life today. At just the right time, Christ died for you. At just the right time. At just the right time, Esther became queen. At just the right time, Xerxes couldn't sleep. At just the right time, Mordecai was rewarded. At just the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. At just the right time, he called you or will call you to be his own child, to take part in this reward of Jesus. At just the right time. You can't get away from that. You rest easy in the confidence that no matter how much or how impossible or how coincidental something may seem to us, God is working out his plan, and he has been working out his plan for you since the beginning of time, at just the right time. See, we tend to sit back. We tend to sit back and we tend to focus on the immediate, right? Think about this kind of in the context of suffering or injustice, maybe delayed gratification. Our tendency is to kind of sit back and we tend to focus on the immediate. How bad things are right now. How much life blows right now. How much everything we're trying to do just isn't going our way. How bad our job is, or how bad our financial situation is, or how bad our health is, or how bad our mood is, or whatever it may be. We tend to focus on the immediate, that moment that we are sitting in right now, and we lose sight and we forget about the fact that God isn't looking at each tiny little moment. God is dealing with all of time. And we start thinking, this is impossible. We can't get through this. It's not going to work out. But God has impeccable timing. And he tends to work on that impeccable timing, and he has been working out that impeccable timing in your own life even before you were born, even before the creation of the world. God works. This is the way that God works in human history. It's the way that he works in human history. And so as we think about, what do we do with this? Where do we go with this? What does this have to do? What does God's impeccable timing have to do with us? We focus this week on that idea of suffering and on that idea of injustice. We suffer big and small in a variety of ways. We look around at the world around us. We say, this person got cancer and they're the greatest Christian we've ever known. That's wrong. That's unjust. We look at what happened up in Washington a couple days ago, at this high school up in Washington a couple days ago, and we think to ourselves, you know what? Nobody deserves that. The students didn't deserve to be targeted. We look at these sheriff's deputies that were killed a couple days ago, yesterday maybe it was, or maybe Friday, and we think, nobody deserves this. They were just doing their job. Nobody deserves what is happening. And we forget about the fact that God's dealing with that. God is dealing with that, and we forget about the fact that we may not see the light right now. We may not see the way out right now. But we have confidence that at some point down the road, God is going to use that. He's going to use that for his glory. He's going to use that to save somebody. He's going to use that to bring attention to himself. He's going to use that to bless you also. God's timing is impeccable. His timing is impeccable. See, Mordecai received a royal reward. A royal reward in that in every way hints at the much greater reward that those who maintain their faith and confidence and who persevere through the suffering and the injustice of life, that reward that those that we eventually do and will receive. Jesus is a better reward, who freely offers us his clothes, his horse, his relationship, and his status before the Father. That we too can be heirs and co-heirs with him. Let's pray.